She thought he was just another disruption, an uninvited black man standing too calmly in the lobby of her high-rise empire. She pointed. She shouted. She demanded security escort him out immediately. But when they arrived, they didn't remove him. They turned to her and asked her to step aside, because what the CEO didn't know was that the man she just tried to humiliate was the new majority stakeholder of her company. And he didn't come to argue. He came to reclaim everything. The lobby was quiet, humming with the low pulse of early morning ambition. Elevator doors sighed open and closed. Espresso machines hissed behind the marble counter of the executive cafe. And in the center of it all, standing completely still, was a man holding a simple black folder. He wasn't pacing, wasn't looking around like he was lost. He was just there, calm, present, unmoving, dark slacks, polished shoes, a pressed button-down shirt without a logo. No lanyard, no briefcase, no security badge. To most, he might have looked like a consultant waiting for a meeting. To Monica Stratton, he was a threat to the curated image she ruled with surgical precision. She spotted him from across the atrium as she stepped off the private elevator, stilettos clicking like punctuation marks against the polished stone floor. Her tone dropped before she even reached him. "Excuse me, can I help you?" she said. The last word stretched thin with irritation. The man turned slightly, met her eyes with an expression that was neither deferent nor aggressive. "Just steady. No help needed," he said gently. Monica's jaw tensed. "This is a private building," she snapped. "You need to leave. Now." The receptionist glanced up, confused. Two interns near the revolving doors paused mid-sip of their overpriced matcha. The man said nothing, just held the folder a little closer to his chest, like it carried something sacred. "I don't know how you got in," Monica continued, raising her voice now, "but if you don't step outside this minute, I will have you escorted out." He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't even blink. "I'm expected," he said simply. Monica's laugh was short and cruel. "By who exactly?" "The cleaning staff." The man's eyes didn't waver. "The board that stopped something in the room." "Not everything. Not yet. But enough." Monica's face tightened. "What board?" He didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because in that moment, when she stepped closer, voice high with disbelief, posture sharp with assumption, she showed the entire lobby exactly what kind of power she believed in. Loud power. Fast power. Power that shouts before it reads the room. What she didn't see, couldn't see, was that her words weren't landing the way they used to. Not anymore. People weren't nodding. They were watching. The man didn't move. Didn't budge. And it was that stillness, the unbearable stillness of someone who knows, that began to unravel her. Because Monica Stratton had built a billion-dollar empire, with poise and presence. But what she'd just done, in full view of her own lobby, was dismiss a black man with confidence in his eyes, and a folder in his hands, before she even asked his name. And that folder, it was the last thing she should have ignored. "You don't belong here." The words cracked through the glass and steel lobby, like a gavel slamming down in an empty courtroom. Heads turned. Keycards paused mid-swipe. The receptionist froze, fingers hovering above her keyboard, suddenly unsure of protocol. Monica Stratton wasn't whispering. She didn't need to. She wanted the room to hear it. She wanted to make an example. The man still hadn't moved, still stood calmly in front of the security gate, one hand loosely holding the folder, the other resting against the chrome rail, like he wasn't in a rush, like he'd been here before. Monica stepped closer, heels slicing through the silence. "I've seen this before," she said, her tone laced with something colder than arrogance, assumption. "You're probably upset. Let me guess. Didn't get the funding you wanted. Or maybe you walked in here thinking someone owed you a meeting." The man looked at her, not past her, not through her, at her. That alone unsettled her more than she'd admit. "Miss Stratton," he said quietly, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The sentence was gentle, measured, almost kind, and it made her furious. "Excuse me," she hissed, stepping closer now, her voice dropping into that performative whisper, meant to still sound loud. "You don't speak to me like that. I am the CEO of this building, this company. You don't just walk in off the street and act like you're owed something." The man didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than her authority. The receptionist's eyes flicked to the side monitor. Something was off. Monica hadn't scanned in that morning, neither had he. And yet, his name, Elijah Reed, was already in the visitor registry, authorized, pre-cleared, priority level, executive escort. Monica didn't notice, or didn't care. She was still too caught up in the optics. A black man standing calmly in her lobby, without visible credentials. In her world, that was a problem, not a possibility. You need to leave. Now, she barked, her voice rising again. Before I call security. You already did, he said. Not smug, not sarcastic, just factual, which made it worse. Monica opened her mouth to fire back, but for the first time, she caught it. The way the interns were watching from near the doors, the way the receptionist had stopped typing, the way the air had shifted. This wasn't playing out how she expected. She was used to obedience, quick apologies, people shrinking under her voice. But this man wasn't shrinking. He was waiting, and somewhere deep beneath the surface of her anger, Monica felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not power, pressure. Monica stabbed the intercom button with the precision of a woman used to getting instant results. Security, now, she barked. Lobby, remove the man standing at the entrance, immediately. Her voice echoed through the speakers like a threat, disguised as instruction. On the other end, there was a beat of silence. Then, copy that. Dispatching now. Monica exhaled sharply, as if that settled the matter, as if pressing a button and barking an order still worked like it always had. It didn't. Her assistant, Claire, stood frozen behind the reception desk. She held a tablet in one hand, fingers hovering over the calendar app. She had seen Monica yell before, at interns, at couriers, at mid-level execs who dared to schedule meetings without vetting the room temperature. But this felt different. There was no tantrum, just a man standing still, and something in Claire's gut whispered that this wasn't someone you could sweep away. Should I check his credentials? Claire asked cautiously. Monica spun. No, you don't verify people who clearly don't belong. You remove them. The man still hadn't moved. He stood near the chrome security turnstiles, like a question left unanswered. The black folder rested neatly against his chest. His shoes were polished. His collar was crisp. And yet to Monica, it didn't matter. He didn't look like someone who had an appointment. He didn't look like someone who was invited. And that, to her, was all she needed to know. Down the hallway, the soft whir of the elevator grew louder. Then came the ding. Two uniformed guards stepped out. Calvin and Andre, longtime employees, who usually spent their mornings redirecting food deliveries and helping clueless interns find the 17th floor. They scanned the lobby, eyes landing on Monica first, then the man beside the desk. Calvin's brow furrowed. Andre's pace slowed. Over here, Monica called, waving them over like she was hailing a cab. This man is trespassing. The guards approached, calm, deliberate. But they didn't face the man. They faced her. Ma'am, Calvin said carefully. May I ask what the issue is? Monica blinked. What's the issue? He doesn't belong here. He refuses to leave. Do your job. Andre turned to the man, gave a respectful nod. Mr. Reed. Claire's head snapped up. Monica's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because suddenly, the hierarchy shifted. And for the first time in her lobby, it wasn't her voice that mattered. It was his presence. The man nodded once, almost kindly. No rush, he said. I'll wait. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Because from the way the guards stood, from the way Claire lowered her tablet, from the way the air settled cold and quiet, Monica finally realized something she hadn't considered. She might have just called security on the wrong person. The guards didn't rush. They walked with quiet authority, the kind built not on muscle, but on knowing when not to speak. Calvin's hand rested near his belt, not on it. Andre scanned the lobby, with practiced calm, noting Monica's posture, Claire's frozen expression, the eyes peeking from the mezzanine above. They knew tension when they saw it. But this wasn't tension. This was a mistake unfolding in real time. Monica pointed sharply, like her finger could command gravity itself. There. Him. Get him out of here. Calvin didn't move. Andre didn't even glance toward the man. Instead, both turned to Monica, measured still, unreadable. Ma'am, Calvin said evenly. Are you sure? Monica's voice rose instantly, louder than before. Of course I'm sure. He's trespassing, and now he's wasting my time. Remove him. The lobby didn't stir, but it listened, phones stilled mid-text. A delivery guy by the revolving door lingered longer than he should have. In a space built for glossy efficiency, something raw was happening. Loud, public, irreversible. Andre looked at the man. Elijah, he said, with the same tone you might use for someone you respect but haven't seen in a while. You good? The man, Elijah, nodded once. I'm fine, just waiting. He didn't need to explain. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask. That alone sent a ripple through the room. Calvin turned back to Monica, voice quieter now, but firmer. Ma'am, I think you should take a seat. The sentence didn't land like a suggestion. It landed like a shift. Monica blinked, her voice caught halfway between defiance and disbelief. Excuse me, I'm serious, Calvin said gently. This man is not a threat, and I think it would be best for everyone if you stepped back for a moment. Claire's hand slowly lowered the tablet to the desk. The receptionist's eyes flicked to the visitor log again, where one name sat at the top in bold read, Elijah, P. cleared. Board access. The weight of that line settled heavily in the air. Monica's face flushed. Do you even know who I am? Andre met her gaze, calm and unmoved. Yes, ma'am. And we also know who he is. A silence fell so complete it made the soft hum of the lobby lights feel deafening. Monica's shoulders stiffened, her authority shrinking under the weight of a truth she hadn't prepared for. Elijah didn't move. He hadn't moved once. And yet, somehow the entire room had shifted around him. He was no longer the one under scrutiny. She was. And the worst part, he hadn't raised a single word in anger, because he didn't have to. Silence, when held by someone who belongs, says everything. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't lift his chin or shift his stance. He simply opened the folder. The click of the metal clasp echoed faintly in the marble silence of the lobby. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. It was precise, like a clock hand moving into place. Monica watched, arms folded, trying to mask the flicker of uncertainty rising behind her eyes. Inside the folder, no protest signs, no credentials, no apology letter, just papers, perfectly aligned, neatly clipped, heavy with ink. The first page bore a seal, not a logo, a seal, raised and official, notarized. The next a corporate filing from the Secretary of State, then an acquisition agreement, 5 signatures deep, and finally, a single sheet. Elijah slid forward with measured grace. It stopped, just at the edge of the front desk. Claire's fingers hovered an inch above it, afraid to touch it. Across the top in bold, transfer of controlling interest, Stratum Dynamics in C. Beneath it, to Mr. Elijah T. Reed. The words didn't scream. They didn't glow or blink, but they didn't need to. They landed like a brick through glass. Monica took a step forward, scanned the sheet, then shook her head, fast, instinctive, like swatting away a nightmare before it fully formed. No, she muttered. This is some kind of joke, a forgery, a setup. Elijah didn't flinch. Calvin stepped forward now, gently taking the paper into his hands. His eyes scanned it quickly, twice. Then he looked up at Andre. The unspoken verdict passed between them like a current. Claire finally lowered her hand and took the page, her eyes scanning the signature line, and there it was. Board approval, 8 of 11 signatures, verified, dated, witnessed, and one name printed at the top of the buyer line. Elijah T. Reed Holdings, LLC. Monica's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. She looked around for support, for someone to laugh with her, to confirm this was an elaborate prank. But the receptionist was dead quiet. The guards were still. The lobby, once hers, now felt like a witness stand. You can't just walk in here. And I didn't walk in, Elijah said quietly. I was invited, by your board. He didn't smile. He didn't need to, because the moment the folder opened, the illusion Monica had built of control, of dominance, of certainty, had cracked, not with a bang, but with paper. The most dangerous kind, the kind that didn't need to raise its voice, the kind that rewrote who belonged where. And now the man she tried to have removed wasn't just in her lobby, he owned it. Monica's smile held for a beat too long. The kind of smile that once charmed boardrooms and silenced complaints. The kind that had closed funding rounds, ended lawsuits, and controlled every narrative, with a curve of the lip and a tilt of the chin. But not this time. Because as Claire turned page after page, eyes wide, lips parted, and the guards stepped back slightly out of respect, not restraint, Monica felt the air leave her. This, she laughed, brittle and forced. This has to be a mistake. Elijah didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because the documents said everything. She reached forward, snatched the sheet from Claire's hand, eyes scanning for a typo, a loophole, something. But the more she read, the worse it got. There it was again, in bold and legal clarity. Majority ownership transferred. Full executive authority, vested in Mr. Elijah T. Reed, not pending, not proposed, finalized. The signatures were real, so was the timestamp, and so, horrifyingly, was the oversight. Who approved this? She hissed, voice cracking. I never saw these papers. This wasn't on the board agenda. Claire didn't answer. She didn't even blink. Because everyone in the room now knew what Monica didn't. The board had acted without her. Elijah took a step forward, not threatening, not grand, just present. You missed the last 2 board meetings, he said, voice calm. Your proxy didn't vote, and the bylaws allow for a simple majority, in cases of acquisition. Monica shook her head as if trying to erase the words from the air. They wouldn't do this without me. I am Stratton Dynamics. No, Elijah said gently. You were. The weight of that sentence landed like a stone, not just on Monica, but on the idea she'd built her entire empire around invincibility. She looked around now, not for support, but for escape. But no one moved. No one came to her defense. Not the guards, not her assistant, not the space she once controlled with nothing but tone and timing. Her face had drained of color. The flush of power had evaporated, and all that was left behind the tailored blazer and flawless makeup was something raw, panic. Elijah didn't push, didn't gloat. He simply held her gaze with the kind of quiet authority that couldn't be bought or faked. The kind that came from knowing the difference between showing power and being it. And Monica, for the first time in her career, was facing someone who didn't need a title to win, because he already had the one thing she couldn't reclaim, the truth, signed, stamped, sealed, and unfolding in front of everyone she once commanded. He never wanted the spotlight. Not the magazine covers, not the stage time at summits, not the performative panels that turned real strategy into sound bites. Elijah Reed had seen all of that, and walked away. Harvard Business School had taught him how the game was played. Wall Street taught him who rigged it. He'd worn the tailored suits, sat at the mahogany tables, outperformed colleagues who underestimated him before he'd said a word. But somewhere between earning respect and surviving it, Elijah realized something in rooms built to ignore people like him. Brilliance wasn't enough. So he stopped trying to impress the room and started buying the building, quietly, methodically. Over the next 12 years, he became a shadow with capital. Not loud money, the kind that flaunts and fades, but precise capital, focused, intentional, strategic. He launched Reed Holdings with 2 friends and a single line of credit. His name didn't headline the deals. His photo didn't grace any under 40 inches lists. But behind startups that suddenly found footing, behind failing firms that inexplicably turned around, there was often a silent investor with a black notebook and a long memory. Elijah watched the markets the way surgeons watch vitals, looking for dips, for patterns, for pressure points. He specialized in companies too arrogant to see their own weaknesses, ones that mistook branding for strategy, inclusion statements for culture, and Monica Stratton's empire. It was the final piece. He'd remembered her, not just the name, the moment. 10 years ago he pitched Stratton Dynamics a product, a data tool that predicted supply chain collapses using real-time demographic and infrastructure shifts. Monica had listened with a glossy smile, then dismissed it as too niche for enterprise use. She hadn't even taken the mock-up. Clever, she'd said. But we don't do charity tech here. It wasn't the rejection that stayed with him. It was the way she said charity. So he watched her, studied her moves, her acquisitions, her debts, her culture audits. He waited for the moment when the company's innovation would plateau, and investors would grow impatient for a savior. Then he made his move. Bought 2 of her suppliers through shell groups. Acquired a dormant partner firm in Poland. Sat quietly on a VC board that funneled bridge loans into her expansion strategy, and then pulled them back. Piece by piece, her empire leaned. And when the board started looking for a buyer, someone to steady the ship, they found Elijah. Not flashy, not loud, just ready. Because Elijah hadn't come to knock on Stratton's door. He came to own the keys. And now, standing in her lobby, with her staff watching and her voice cracking under pressure, he knew exactly how he got here. One deliberate step at a time. It had been a Thursday, late spring, Midtown. The conference room had smelled like citrus and control, diffused orange oil, and freshly printed quarterly reports. Elijah had walked in with a clean slide deck, a calm voice, and an idea he'd spent 3 years perfecting. A startup with a heartbeat, a predictive analytics tool designed to serve small businesses in overlooked communities. Infrastructure insights, supply chain stabilization, data that could change outcomes, not just profit margins. Monica hadn't looked up once during the pitch. She'd scrolled through her phone, sipped her sparkling water, and waited until the final slide to speak. "It's clever," she said, tilting her head like she was inspecting something beneath her, "but a bit narrow, don't you think?" Elijah stayed composed. "It's focused. That's the point. We're targeting vulnerable markets before collapse, using real-time mapping, public infrastructure data, even weather trends." Monica smiled. The kind of smile you give a child who doesn't understand the rules yet. "Elijah, you're smart. But let's be honest, this is too urban. It's not something our partners will touch. Not market-friendly, not scalable, not now." Then came the part that etched itself in his memory. "You should consider pivoting to something more polished, something with broader appeal. You've clearly got potential. Just not here." She hadn't even taken the leave-behind packet. Her assistant had tossed it in the trash before Elijah had reached the elevator. That was the day the fire started. Not rage, not spite, just clarity. She hadn't said no to the business. She'd said no to him. To the way he dressed, the way he spoke, the audacity to believe data tools could serve barbershops, corner bodegas, community clinics. She hadn't rejected a product. She'd rejected a world she didn't think deserved precision. So he built in silence. Not to prove her wrong. To build a world where people like her didn't get to decide who mattered. And now, years later, she didn't even recognize him. Not really. She saw a calm man in a lobby, a folder in his hand, a problem to be handled. She didn't realize she was looking at the same founder she'd dismissed with a flick of her manicured hand. The same black man she'd told to build something more palatable. And now, as the realization flickered behind her eyes, uncertain, sharp, too late, Elijah stood with the documents she once said he'd never earn, because the history she forgot was the one he memorized. And her rejection, that wasn't the end of the story. It was the ignition switch. The warning signs had been there, buried in plain sight. 3 memos marked, "Urgent strategic investor discussion." 1 board invite she skipped because internal optics mattered more than real votes. An attachment labeled "Acquisition Option Draft," flagged in red, unread in her inbox for 12 days. Monica Stratton didn't miss meetings. She curated them. She believed in showing up only when it mattered, when cameras were on, when deals were final, when being seen was synonymous with being in control. The little things. The fine print. That's what her legal team was for. So when the board quietly scheduled a private session, without her, she didn't object. She thought it was posturing, a routine formality. She had no idea it was a signature away from surrender. And they had signed it. All but 3. The majority had reviewed Elijah's proposal in detail. Saw the numbers, saw the recovery roadmap, saw the leadership blueprint laid out with terrifying clarity. They hadn't just accepted it. They had welcomed it. Because behind Monica's closed-door polish, the company had been bleeding, sinking morale, quiet exits, missed projections disguised by branding campaigns, and most of all, a culture that people smiled through, until they quit. So when Elijah Reed's holding company submitted a buy-in proposal, with a 90-day restructure timeline, and equity redistribution clauses, that actually protected junior staff, the board didn't hesitate. They sold 52%, majority control, weeks ago, and Monica never noticed, because she thought power was about visibility, She didn't realize it was about attention. While she was in Tokyo, accepting a leadership award she'd ghostwritten herself, the company shifted. While she was filming a shareholder update in a silk blouse and perfectly lit office, Elijah was finalizing paperwork in a quiet room downtown. While she was rehearsing a TED-style keynote about knowing every corner of your kingdom, her throne was already gone. Now, standing in her own lobby, Monica was trying to recall how she'd missed it. The emails, the meeting invites, the tension on her assistant's face last Tuesday. Claire had hesitated that morning when asked to clear the lobby, because Claire had read the filings, had seen the ownership transfer, had printed the briefing memo meant for Monica's desk, the one Monica never picked up. Now it was too late. The board didn't need to call her. They'd already replaced her, and the man standing across from her, calm, deliberate, folder in hand, wasn't here for a conversation. He was here to assume his role, the role she didn't even realize she'd forfeited. Because when you stop reading the fine print, you stop seeing the future. And Elijah Reed, he hadn't missed a word. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, the sound somehow louder than it should have been. A clean silver interior, mirrored walls, silent anticipation. Elijah stepped forward, calm. No rush, no spectacle. "I'm not here for revenge," he said quietly, finally breaking the silence that had stretched like wire across the lobby. His voice was steady, not cruel. "I'm here for reform, not a threat, a promise." Then he stepped inside. Calvin moved instinctively, pressing the executive floor button before Elijah could lift a finger. Andre stood by the door, one hand holding it open, the other resting gently on the frame, like he was guarding something far more important than access. Monica jolted into motion. "Wait," she snapped, heels clicking across the marble as if volume could still buy her time. "I'm going up." She reached for the doors just as Andre stepped in front of her. "Ma'am," he said firmly, his voice low but unmoving, "you'll need to wait here." Her mouth fell open. "Are you serious? That's my building. My floor." Andre didn't blink. Not anymore. Monica's breath caught, somewhere between disbelief and rage. "I can fire you for this." "No ma'am," Calvin said, his voice gentle but final from inside the elevator. "You can't." The words didn't come like rebellion. They came like fact. Elijah didn't even turn around. He simply stood, hands resting at his sides, his reflection staring back at him in the mirrored walls. There was no triumph on his face, no smile, just clarity, purpose. The same quiet energy that had unnerved her the moment she saw him still hadn't left. If anything, it had only grown. Monica tried again. "You don't understand what you're walking into. There are policies, protocols. You can't just..." Elijah spoke without looking at her. "This company's had policies that silenced people for years, protocols that punished innovation. That ends today." The elevator's tone chimed again, final warning. Claire stood behind the desk now, not saying a word. Her eyes tracked the exchange like someone watching a dam finally break. Monica took one last step forward, hand raised like a plea. "You're going to ruin everything." Elijah turned just slightly, enough for his eyes to meet hers through the narrowing doors. "No," he said softly. "I'm going to rebuild it." And then click. The doors closed. The lobby exhaled, quietly, and all at once. Monica stood alone now, surrounded by silence she didn't control. Her authority hadn't been taken from her with shouting or scandal. It had stepped into the elevator and left her standing there with nothing but the echo of a sentence she'd never expected to hear from the man she tried to erase. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for reform." The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, but the sound sliced through the executive floor like thunder. It wasn't a lobby anymore. It was a war room waiting for orders. Glass walls, million-dollar views, and the lingering scent of designer coffee and quiet panic. Around the long table in conference room A, the senior leadership team had gathered for what they thought would be a standard Monday alignment. They were wrong. Elijah stepped out, the same folder in his hand, the same calm in his expression. No entourage, no announcement. But something in the air shifted the moment his foot touched the carpet. Heads turned. First one, then two, then all 10 executives rose slowly from their chairs, not because they were told to, but because something told them to. Some straightened their jackets. Others cleared their throats. One man instinctively closed his laptop like it might protect him. The CTO, Lauren Vess, was the first to speak. "Mr. Reed," she said softly, nodding. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded ready. Across the table, the CFO looked pale, his jaw tight. The general counsel blinked twice and reached, almost instinctively, for the acquisition documents he'd already reviewed 3 times over the weekend. They all knew. The rumor had broken late Friday in hushed back-channel texts. A shift in controlling shares. A holding firm with quiet power. A name attached to it. Reed. But seeing him here now made it real. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Let's keep this brief," he said, stepping to the head of the table. "Effective immediately. I'll be assuming interim control until the formal transition process completes." No one interrupted. No one dared. He placed the folder gently on the table, flipped it open, and slid a single copy of the acquisition terms toward the general counsel, who reached for it like a man handed his own verdict. Elijah's eyes moved across the room, not angry, not gloating, just precise. "You've all had time to review the filings. You know this isn't a hostile takeover. It's a correction." Some looked relieved, especially the ones who'd quietly raised concerns over the last year, and watched them vanish in Monica's perfectly worded dismissal emails. Others looked terrified. The VP of Ops shifted uncomfortably. He remembered this man. He'd once sent Elijah to a side lobby during a strategy showcase, because VIPs only passed this point. And now, the man he sent away was standing at the head of the table, with every legal right to rewrite his future. Elijah tapped the table once. "This is your chance to decide who you want to be under new leadership," he said. "No more pretending. No more silence. We start fresh today. No threats, just truth." And as the executives sat back down, slower, more deliberate now, they weren't just facing a new CEO. They were facing the return of someone they'd once dismissed as invisible. And this time, he was looking right at them. The boardroom was colder than she remembered. Not in temperature. Climate control still hummed softly behind the walls, but in energy, in presence, in who held the air. Monica stood near the head of the table, arms folded, blazer perfect, lips set in a tight line, like she'd rehearsed resilience on the elevator ride up. The long glass wall behind her reflected her outline, but it didn't make her look powerful. It made her look small. Elijah entered without fanfare. No entourage. No announcement. Just the quiet closing of the door behind him, and the sound of polished shoes crossing the floor that used to welcome her. They stood facing each other, separated only by a table, and the weight of everything unsaid. "Elijah," she began, reaching for that familiar tone, smooth, polished, professionally dismissive. "Let's be reasonable. This transition, if it's even valid, needs to go through the appropriate channels. There are protocols, review windows, and I still hold veto rights for." "You don't," he said, calm as glass. "The filings nullified your executive privileges last week. The vote was sealed Friday." Monica flinched, just slightly. She scanned the room for support, an ally, a lifeline, but the chairs around the table remained empty. The board had cleared the space at Elijah's request. This wasn't about witnesses. This was about accountability. "I built this company," she said, voice sharper now, "from scratch, from nothing." Elijah looked at her, still, measured. "You built a name," he said, "but you forgot the people inside it." He pulled a single document from the folder, thicker than the others, embossed final. "The formal termination. Effective immediately," he said, placing the letter on the table. "You are relieved of duty as acting CEO of Stratton Dynamics." Monica's hand hovered above the table, like she might swipe it away, like the paper could be denied with enough force. But she didn't touch it. She just stood there, breathing shallow, spine rigid, waiting for the outburst, for the gloating, for the vengeance. It never came. Elijah met her eyes, not with cruelty, not with triumph, but with something far more devastating. "Truth. This company deserves better," he said. 4 words, soft, final, and sharper than any scream. Monica blinked. Once, twice, but no words came out. The usual comebacks, the rehearsed indignation, the righteous fury, they'd all dried up, because for the first time, there was no one to impress, no one to perform for, only the man she'd dismissed, standing where she used to stand. And with those 4 words, Elijah didn't just end her tenure, he rewrote the beginning of his. The first thing Elijah changed wasn't policy. It was the tone. He didn't call an all-hands meeting in a massive auditorium. He didn't issue a sweeping video message full of buzzwords. He walked floor by floor, department by department, one conversation at a time. And when he finally gathered the full staff, on a quiet Tuesday morning in the open-air atrium, he didn't stand on a stage. He stood with them. No suit, no spotlight, just a crisp shirt, sleeves rolled up, and the kind of presence that didn't demand attention. It earned it. From this day forward, he said, voice low but unwavering, respect is no longer optional here. The words didn't land like a mission statement. They landed like a mirror. No applause, just stillness, the kind that says everyone's listening. Then came the changes. Not just logos or slogans, but structure. He launched an equity program that didn't just talk diversity, it funded it. Pay audits, advancement pipelines, blind resume reviews. The kind of reform that couldn't be spun into PR, because it wasn't about optics, it was about justice. Anonymous feedback lines were opened, but more than that answered. Middle managers who'd built kingdoms out of fear were reassigned. The ones who'd kept quiet while talent walked out the door found themselves walking too. Elijah didn't fire out of anger. He recalibrated out of necessity. Departments were no longer silos. Cross-functional teams became standard. Titles were flattened. Voices that had once been ignored in meetings were now being called on first. And the lobby, the place where it all began, it changed too. The cold chrome desk was replaced with warm wood and soft lighting. The welcome counter was moved to the center, not tucked behind a security gate. A new plaque was installed on the wall behind it. No founder's name, no timeline of awards, just 7 words in brushed steel. You belong here. From day one, employees noticed. So did clients. The energy shifted, less defensive, more awake. People who used to show up early, just to survive now, stayed late because they felt seen. HR no longer stood for handle and remove. It stood for human reality. Conversations became candid. Feedback became reciprocal. Silence was no longer the culture. It was the red flag. Elijah didn't hover. He didn't micromanage. He built trust and let it breathe. And for the first time in a long time, Stratton Dynamics felt less like a fortress and more like a future. Because reform didn't come through noise. It came through intention. And under Elijah Reed, a new standard had been set. One where titles didn't protect you, and every voice had a seat at the table. The door creaked open with a resistance that hadn't been there before. Monica stepped into what used to be her office, corner view, glass walls, a skyline that once mirrored her ambition. Now it felt unfamiliar, stripped, quiet in a way that made her heels sound louder than usual. The shelves were half empty, her nameplate gone. A faint outline on the desk where her favorite pen holder had stood. She wasn't supposed to be here. Her separation package had been finalized. Access revoked. But HR had given her 20 minutes to gather what remained. She didn't ask for more. As she turned toward the desk, she saw it. A plain white envelope. No name on the outside, just centered. Waiting. She hesitated before picking it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, and behind it, something heavier. A thin deck of paper, bound by a black clip. She recognized it instantly. The pitch. His pitch. The original one. Slightly worn now, but intact. The same bold logo in the corner. The same slides she never finished reading. The one she'd dismissed, belittled, forgotten, until now. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through it. It was better than she remembered. Cleaner, smarter. Years ahead of its time. She hadn't just passed on potential. She had buried brilliance under her own bias, and moved on like it hadn't mattered. She unfolded the note. It wasn't long. Monica, you didn't just reject a company, you underestimated a legacy. I built something with roots deeper than your boardroom, and stronger than your gatekeeping. You could have been part of it. Elijah, that was it. No venom, no gloating, just a message sharper than any reprimand. She sat down slowly in the chair that no longer belonged to her. The skyline outside hadn't changed, but her place in it had, completely, permanently. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was full of everything she'd missed, every voice she hadn't listened to, every name she hadn't remembered, every pitch she hadn't read past page 2. She looked down at the deck again. His slides, his data, his vision, and beneath it, the truth that stung more than the loss of a title. Elijah hadn't just come back to prove her wrong. He had returned to build what she had refused to see. And now, the empire she'd once ruled had a new architect. One whose legacy she tried to erase, but who left his message, in her office, on her desk, like a signature she never saw coming. The lobby looked different now. Same marble floors, same high ceilings, but the air felt lighter, softer, less about presence, and more about purpose. The cold chrome had been replaced with warm oak. The old security gate, gone. In its place, an open welcome counter, where a receptionist smiled with her whole face, not just her job. Elijah stood near the center, hands in his pockets, watching the morning flow. Employees moved through with ease, some chatting, some quiet, but all walking like they belonged. And then the doors parted. A young man stepped in, hesitant, barely 20, hoodie too big, backpack slung over one shoulder like it didn't want to be there, skin the color of coffee, and eyes scanning the room like they weren't sure if this was the right place, or if he was. He paused just inside, holding a visitor's badge loosely between his fingers. An intern. Elijah knew instantly, not from his clothes, not from the badge, from the look. The same look Elijah once wore into lobbies that never expected him. That didn't want to. A receptionist started to stand, ready to direct. But Elijah raised a hand gently. He stepped forward, closing the distance not with power, but with recognition. The young man stiffened, unsure. "Morning," Elijah said with a nod. The intern swallowed hard, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here for orientation." Elijah Reed Holdings. "I think they told me to wait here. But He glanced at the suit, the posture, the presence. "I didn't know if," Elijah smiled. "Not the kind you use to make someone feel comfortable. The kind you use when you mean it. You're exactly where you're supposed to be," he said. Then added, softer, "Welcome. You belong here." The words landed like a hand on the shoulder, firm, steady, enough to hold a young man upright. The intern blinked, took a breath, stood taller without trying to. And for the first time since he walked in, his fingers stopped shaking. Behind them, employees moved on, coffee in hand, laptops open, but one or two paused just long enough to watch the moment, because they knew that wasn't just a greeting, it was a reversal. A space once guarded by assumption had become a place of permission. Elijah stepped back, gesturing to the welcome desk. "Go ahead," he said. "They're expecting you." The intern nodded slowly and walked forward, not fast, not uncertain, just forward. Elijah stayed a moment longer. Same lobby, same doors, different legacy. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as a hallway that finally opens, and as powerful as the words no one ever said to you, but you finally get to say to someone else. You belong here. If you've ever been underestimated, talked over, dismissed, or told you didn't belong, this story is your reminder. You don't need permission to be powerful. Quiet strength is louder than arrogance. Truth, when documented, becomes undeniable. And legacy, it's not built in boardrooms. It's built in resolve. If Elijah Reed inspired you, tell us in the comments. Have you ever proved someone wrong just by standing in your truth? Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded they're not invisible. Subscribe for more real stories, where dignity rises, power gets redefined, and silence turns into something stronger than revenge. Clarity. Because next time the story might be yours.